Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching 7th part of What If Naruto Became Demon Dragon Rider. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
2 days after Gaara was saved, Suna. As Naruto looked out of his tent in the Konoha camp in Suna, he sighed. Shinobi from Konoha were busy taking down their tents and packing up their gear as they got ready to go back to Konoha. On one side were the nearly 2,000 Iwa prisoners who would go with them and be used in negotiations and prisoner exchanges with the Iwa. Suna would be in charge of the remaining 1,000 or so prisoners, for similar reasons and uses. Naruto sighed as he walked out of the cave with his helmet on and his clones putting away his tent and gear. Gaara had been saved from the Akatsuki 2 days before. Gaara had just woken up the day before. When he was told what had happened, he thanked Naruto for saving him. Matsuri gave Naruto a hug and kissed him on the cheek before going back to her boyfriend's side. This made Naruto smile. After that, there was a big party where Naruto, dressed as an Oni, and Onyxia were the guests of honor. People came to look at the dragon in awe and respect, which the dragon enjoyed. Flashback. As the 10th person walked away from Onyxia, who was standing tall with her wings spread, Naruto laughed. "You're enjoying all this attention, aren't you?" She gave him a dragon-like grin. "It's nice to be noticed." "I'm a very regal-looking creature," she said, spreading her wings even more. Naruto had a laugh. "Oh, yes, especially when you're taking a mud bath or eating a whole cow." He got a mean look from Onyxia. "You, Sira, will never tell anyone about that," she said with pride. Naruto just chuckled. Kyuubi was inside the blonde and taking notes on a notepad. "Oh, this is a solid gold blackmail." Flashback is over. When she was given a tub of sake during a toast to Konoha and Suna's victory as a team, her image was ruined, of course. A tub, which she was happy to take. This made her sway and dance drunkenly at the party, send out a fireball in a random direction, and then fall to the ground. Her loud snores could be heard all over the village for hours, keeping many people awake. Now, the black dragon was sleeping near his tent, with her golden eyes closed and her front claws covering her head. Naruto could hear her groans and moans in his mind. "Onyxia, did you have fun last night?" He was thinking to her as he smiled at her. "If my head didn't hurt so much, I'd pin you to the ground with my claws and fall asleep, trapping you there for hours," she growled as another wave of pain hit her head. He laughed as he gently rubbed her nose. "You'll be fine. Don't forget, we have to get back to Konoha. I'm sure the cool air will help clear your mind." She grumbled as she slowly got to her feet and blinked blearily. She looked at the clones putting things in the saddle on her back and then at the Konoha forces getting ready to leave. "Let's get going." Shikaku came up to Naruto, who was smiling and about to jump into the saddle. "Oni," he said. "I need you to go ahead and fly to Hokage-sama with this report. Tell her that we will be there with these prisoners in 3 days." Naruto nodded. "It will be done, Shikaku-san." He took the scroll and climbed onto Onyxia's back. With a grunt, the dragon jumped into the air, and the people of the village cheered and waved. Onyxia circled, gaining height, before turning and heading northeast, back home. Iwa is the office of the Tsuchikage. Sandame Tsuchikage of Iwa, Oenoki, grumbled as he sat back after reading the report from his forward scouts. For once, the old and small Kage didn't complain about how much his body hurt. Instead, he crumpled up the report and said, "So, our forces were taken?" "Yes, Tsuchikage-sama," said the shinobi who gave him the report. "It looks like they knew about the plan and set up a trap. At first, we thought we had lost between 200 and 500 shinobi. The people who stayed behind are now definitely prisoners of war." Oenoki sighed and looked down. He was quiet for a few minutes before turning to look over the fortress-like village he ruled. "Send a message to our field commanders telling them to stop all advances and not to provoke the Konoha or Suna shinobi. Send a letter to Konoha and Suna asking them to stop fighting so we can talk about getting the prisoners freed." The shinobi bowed and said, "Tsuchikage-sama," then turned and left to do what he was told. Oenoki rubbed his head and closed his eyes, then opened them again and said, "I'm getting too old for all this. Maybe this war wasn't such a good idea after all," he muttered before turning to his desk. He had to get ready for whatever Konoha wanted. They had far fewer prisoners than Konoha and Suna did now. He grumbled, knowing that his stubbornness was about to cost Iwa a lot. Otto, after a few hours. Before Sasuke Uchiha killed Orochimaru, the rogue snake Sannin, Otogakure no Sato was nothing more than a collection of bases spread out across the shinobi lands. After Orochimaru's death at the hands of his apprentice and future host, Sasuke Uchiha, these bases had fallen into disarray and chaos, with the shinobi and scientists in charge of each one fighting each other for power and territory. One by one, they were killed, and their forces were added to the new Otokages. Their research, experiments, and forces were taken back to the hidden base in the land of rice paddies, where the ruins of Orochimaru's first base were rebuilt into a powerful fortress. Here, the Nidaime Otokage led his forces during the Fourth Shinobi War. Even now, he was talking to his top shinobi about how things were going. When Konoha took Kumo out of the war for good, they broke the safety of our left flank. Now, the Iwa forces are pulling back so that prisoners can be swapped. Our supplies to the front lines and our outposts on the edges are in danger if we don't strengthen our defenses quickly, he hissed from under his cloak. He pointed to one of the shinobi present and said, "Tell our forces to retreat to our borders. Help those who watch our eastern side." As the shinobi bowed and left, the Otokage turned to the other shinobi and said, "With the arrival of their scaly mercenary, Konoha finally got some backbone. But even though Iwa has left, they still don't have enough troops to attack us all the way, and Suna can't help them. For now, we have to make sure they can't attack our supply lines to our troops, and we're going to wait until we can strike again." One of the shinobi spoke up with some hesitation. "Kage-sama, maybe it would be best to stop the war? We are outnumbered by 2 of the 5 great powers, and Kiri has already shown signs of joining forces with Konoha and Suna." Before he could say anything else, he started blinking, couldn't talk, and felt heat around his neck. He slowly reached up and found blood in a gaping hole where his throat used to be. He fell to his knees and then to the ground as a bloody snake retreated into the Otokage's cloak. "We won't give up on the war because of 2 small setbacks. Iwa continues to guard our western flank, and the fortress protects the south," he said, referring to the fortress of Sandobaria, Sound Barrier, that had been built. It blocked the only southern entrance to the valley where the village was located. The north and west were blocked by mountains, and the east was blocked by a steep cliff. "Go. So, Konoha thinks they can turn things around? We'll see," he said with a laugh as a pair of glasses caught the torchlight. Tower of Aim, Pain. The Akatsuki had been told to stop looking for Jinchuriki while Pain fixed the broken statue. The Sanbi had been held back by Kisame and Itachi and was now in a special container designed to hold it until it could be sealed again. Since the incident 2 days ago, Konan had kept her distance from Pain. She couldn't be near him now that she knew the truth, that her friend Nagato was really gone and that there was nothing left but this person named Pain. Instead, she spent time with Itachi, who, despite not showing much emotion, was a great listener. The 2 of them talked for hours about their lives and then about things that didn't matter, like what they liked and didn't like. Itachi was an interesting person. In a way, she was glad that he had come to talk to her after what happened. Her smile faded as she touched her cheek, then she shook her head. She wouldn't think about that. 6 of them wore the Akatsuki cloak and had orange hair, black chakra rod piercings, and the Rinnegan Dujutsu. A 7th figure stood at the head of the circle around the statue. This was the true form of Pain, who used to be called Nagato. His thin body was in a walking machine, and chakra rods came out of his back. His ragged red hair fell around his face, almost covering his Rinnegan eyes. Pain watched as the 6 other figures, with their hands raised, sent chakra into the statue, which caused it to slowly rebuild. He didn't react to the figure coming out of the shadows. The figure in the shadows looked at the statue and said, "So, our young Kyuubi Jinchuriki did this?" He looked at Pain and said, "He's been hiding in plain sight as this mercenary." Pain didn't answer, and the statue just looked at him. "How long until it's fixed?" "I'm not sure," Pain said quietly. "It could take weeks or even months. This was something I didn't expect at all." "We'll stay out of sight until then," the figure said with a quiet nod. "But after that, I expect you to take care of the Kyuubi yourself. He is too strong for Itachi and Kisame to handle." "I think you are." Pain just nodded and said, "I get it. I'll get the Kyuubi inside." He said, "I want to bring peace to the world." "Soon, Pain," the figure said with a nod. He turned away and said, "Peace will soon come to this world." As he did, a single Sharingan eye appeared in the darkness of his face, and then he was gone. Pain shook as he said, "Naruto Uzumaki. I will not let you escape again. I give you my word." "Konoha." Even though he wasn't going anywhere, Sasuke had to stay in shape, so he did push-ups on the floor. As he did his usual 100 push-ups, he wondered why he hadn't been brought to trial yet. They had questioned him to find out what he knew, but otherwise they just kept him locked up. It didn't make sense to him. He sighed quietly as he leaned back in his cell and looked out the window. About 6 years ago, he was the king of this village. Now, he was a prisoner and a traitor. The irony was pretty funny. He closed his eyes and leaned back. They had to have him here for a reason. He would wait until they told him. The Uchiha didn't know it, but the reason he hadn't been put on trial yet was because Tsunade and Kushina wanted Naruto to face Sasuke first. They also didn't know how to deal with Itachi, and Iwa's attack had kept them busy. Kushina was currently helping Tayuya regain her ability to walk. The damage to her spine, legs, and muscles had been fixed, allowing her to walk and run again with therapy. However, the chakra networks in her legs were still damaged, and she would need a few more surgeries to fix them and become a kunoichi again, if she wanted to. Shino was also there, giving his friend silent support. He watched as she slowly stumbled around, using a cane to steady herself as she took small, jerky steps. Kushina was following her, ready to catch her. Tayuya had tried to stop her, but she wasn't very good at it. She had tried to say, "I don't need to be babied," but her heart didn't mean it. Part of her loved having this woman, her mother, worry so much about her. It made up for the fact that she hadn't had it all those years before. She sighed as she started to get the hang of it. How long until I can move on my own, instead of like a 70-year-old with back problems? She whispered. Kushina smiled. Tsunade said that if you go to the right therapy sessions, you should be able to move just fine in 3 or 4 months. You probably won't need the cane in a month or 2, but you should still go easy on yourself. She looked at Shino and nodded. So, Specs, do you want to take me for a walk where you don't have to push me? She asked, using her nickname for him. Shino might have been offended by the name, but he didn't care, and she had told him it was a sign of friendship and affection. As he stood up, he nodded quietly and said, "That would be a lot of fun. Maybe we could also see a movie." She smiled and said, "You're on," as she walked toward the door. Kushina could only smile as images of little Aburame-like grandchildren with red hair flashed through her mind. Hinata meditated quietly in the backyard. Naruto had told her to do this so she could find the center of her magic within her mind and body. While he was away, she had been studying the ancient language from a scroll he had left behind. She had also been studying new sword styles from some of the books Naruto had taken from Aragon's cave, looking for one that would work better for her when fighting from a dragon's back. Nearby, her dragon was already much bigger than when he had hatched. He was now the size of a large dog, and he had started silently talking to Hinata. He wasn't talking yet, but Hinata could sort of tell what he was feeling and thinking. She had also given him a name, Azurin. She smiled when she felt him stretch out in the sun, almost like a cat. It was cute. She quietly sighed as she opened her eyes, unable to meditate any longer. She slowly stood up and looked at the Namikaze estate. She smiled quietly, feeling more at home here than she had at the Hyuga estate. But that could be because this home felt more like a family. Hinata smiled and shook her head. She was glad Naruto's life had turned around, and she was surprised by how much hers had too. She looked at her mother's blades, slowly picking them up. Somehow, she felt more at ease with them. Before, when she used them, she had just seen them as tools, and Naruto had used them the same way. Now, though, they felt, well, like more than tools. Like they were a part of her now. She smiled and went quietly into the house. She had more scrolls to read before Naruto came back and their training got harder. The next day in Konoha, Naruto and Onyxia floated down to the top of the Hokage's tower, where Naruto got off his dragon and rubbed her neck. "It's good to be home, huh?" he said with a sigh. He asked her. Onyxia grumbled, "Don't talk for me. I'd rather be out in the wild, where I can't smell the smoke and sweat of people." "In this case, I agree with the dragon. You people have always smelled so bad," Kyuubi added. As he went to Tsunade's office to give the report, Naruto just rolled his eyes at them. When he got there, he was quickly let into her office, and Tsunade gave him a nod and said, "Report. The enemy army was beat. We caught about 2,829 enemy shinobi. The rest were killed while fighting. We split the prisoners between Konoha and Suna, and the Konoha force is currently on its way with the prisoners," Naruto told Tsunade as he gave her the scroll Shikaku had given him. This was a decisive battle for us, Tsunade said with a nod. Iwa has stopped all progress and even sent us a message asking for a short truce so he can talk to us about trading prisoners. Our scouts on the northern border have told us that all of Otto's shinobi have gone back to their side of the Valley of the End. Surely to make their defenses stronger. Good work. The warrior in front of her nodded in thanks, and he was about to leave when the Hokage stopped him. There is something important I think I should tell you, he said. Jiraiya of the Sannin was able to catch the missing nin Sasuke Uchiha while you were away. Naruto stopped and slowly turned back to look at her. Behind his helmet, his eyes got a little harder. I see, he said quietly. That was a lucky break for this village, wasn't it? He asked in a whisper. Tsunade nodded, then looked around, told her Anbu to leave, and then turned to Naruto and said, "It's okay now. You no longer have to pretend." Naruto snarled and clenched his hands. That jerk is here in the village. After all the crap he put me through, he's here. He muttered, shaking. Naruto, he can't hurt you, Tsunade said, putting her hand on his shoulder. He is locked up, and we can deal with him using this truce with Iwa. Don't be afraid of him. He didn't say anything. He just shook. That's hard when your best friend stabs you in the back, he said as he left. I'm going home now. Tsunade sighed and rubbed her forehead as Naruto walked away. This is going to be trouble, she said. Naruto went to the Namikaze estate, ignoring everything else going on around him. This was made easier by the fact that everyone stayed away from him because he had an angry, possibly painful aura. When he got home, he went straight to his room and took off his armor with the help of his clones. He hardly noticed his mom standing in the doorway with a questioning look in her eyes and asking, Naruto? What happened? You learned about Sasuke, didn't you? She asked, then blinked in surprise. Now that he had put the broken armor pieces back on their stand, Naruto turned to her and said, Yes, Mom. I did. I found out that the jerk I worked so hard to save for 4 years is now back in Konoha. His voice was harsh and his eyes were cold. He looked down as Kushina looked at him. I'm sorry. I just thought I was done worrying about him. And now I have to deal with him again. I'm not sure how to handle this. Kushina walked up to him and gave him a hug. No one is telling you to take care of Sasuke. He is a problem for Konoha. No, not you. No longer. Naruto leaned into his mother's embrace and said, Maybe you're right, Mom. Still, I care too much about him to ignore him, he said softly. I guess I'll have to think about it. For now, I have to worry about other things. Like Hinata's training. She smiled and gave a soft nod. While you were gone, she worked hard on her studies. She is learning the basics of the ancient language and has given her dragon a name. Azurin. He nodded. A good name. He smiled softly as he looked out the window. Thanks for cheering me up, Mom, he said softly. She nodded and left him alone. He looked out the window for a few minutes before taking a deep breath and saying, The wind is changing. A move toward balance again. But is it moving fast enough to keep going? Nobody knows, child. We can only hope for the best and deal with what happens next, Anixia said in his head as she lounged on the grass below. Why don't you come outside? Your apprentice is waiting for you, and the sun is out. Naruto smiled softly and nodded. He would worry about what might happen when it did happen. For now, he would live in the present. He smiled as he left his room, leaving his worries behind. For now. Iwa has been in Suna for 6 months now. If you walked by the Namikaze estate in Konoha's clan district, you would have heard the clash and ring of metal on metal, as well as cheers from 2 women who almost sounded like they were saying the same thing. In fact, Kushina and Tayuya Namikaze were the ones who made those 2 sounds. And the sound of metal hitting each other? That was one of the swords used by the 2 shinobi who were fighting. One of them was Naruto, who was wearing full armor and wielding his swordvinder with both hands. Sometimes, he used only one hand to make shorter, faster strikes. His opponent? Hinata Hyuga, wielding her newest weapons. Hinata, who used to be the Hyuga heiress, had been Naruto's apprentice for 7 months. During that time, she had made great strides in her training. She now knew a lot about the ancient language and could speak it well, but she hadn't mastered it completely yet. She had also taught herself how to write a lot of it. Because of this, Hinata was able to learn a lot of spells. Even though Naruto had told her that no one could ever really master every spell because there were so many of them. Each spell was shaped by the words and intentions of the person who cast it. Their only limits were what their bodies could do and what they could think of. Hinata had also grown physically, getting stronger and being able to do things for longer. Even though she wasn't as strong as Naruto, she could keep up with most people in Konoha. She could even make Guy and Rock Lee sweat a little. All of this was done so that she could cast many spells and jutsus before she ran out of power. Now, Hinata stood in front of Naruto, holding her new weapons while she lightly panted. Hinata had a curved, one-handed sword in her hands. From the books she had read, she knew it was an elfin saber. The blade was about 2.5 feet long and had a curve like a katana, but it was a bit sharper. The blade was also thinner and didn't taper into a point like the katana did. Instead, it came to a sharp point. The hilt was about 6 inches long and had a crossguard that looked like dragon wings. The hilt was straight, but as it got closer to the blade, it curved into the shape of a dragon's head. A small round shield about 2 feet in diameter was lying on the ground nearby. The shield was made of wood and had a thin sheet of metal on the front. It had a slight dome shape. A dark blue dragon running after its own tail was drawn on the shield. Hinata's weapons got more than just a new sword and shield. Naruto had also insisted that she wear some kind of armor because dragon riders are usually at the front of the battle. Hinata was smaller than Naruto, so she didn't wear the full chainmail and metal armor that he did. Instead, with the help of Naruto and Tenten, she had made her own armor. Hinata's main piece of armor was made up of several pieces of hardened leather that were put together to make a chest piece that moved and protected her from her collarbone to her waist. Her biceps were covered by short chainmail sleeves, and a chainmail went down to just above her knees. The skirt was open between the legs, so when she ran, it didn't get in the way. She also had greaves and metal-studded leather pauldrons that looked like Naruto's full metal ones. But instead of Naruto's clawed gauntlets, Hinata wore leather bracers that were attached to fingerless gloves. For safety, the gloves had metal plates on the back. Hinata's armor was finished off with a light leather helmet with a dragon-shaped nose guard and cheek guards. The helmet was open-faced, but the nose guard was made to look like a thin dragon. The back of her neck was also protected, too. Her armor was dark blue and silver around the edges. Again, the two warriors fought and their swords touched. Naruto was strong with his sword, but Hinata was able to stop Naruto's blade with more power because she could put her left hand on the flat of her sword. The two moved away from each other, taking their positions back and getting ready for the next fight. Kushina grinned at Tayuya. Hinata has changed a lot, hasn't she? Tayuya nodded. Yeah, she can now talk to him for a whole half hour. Who knows, maybe she'll even hit him one day. They were interrupted by a loud noise as two large masses landed in the backyard, not too far from the group. Everyone stopped to look at the two dragons that were now standing there and slowly folding their wings. The smaller dragon, which was dark blue, slowly walked over to Hinata and nuzzled his head against her. Azurin, her dragon, had finally reached adulthood. He was now big enough to ride and could also breathe fire. Because he was growing so fast, Tsunade had to tell the village that there was another dragon rider among them. About a year ago, everyone would have wanted to control that person and their dragon and make an army of dragon riders. Now, though, the claim was accepted, and Konoha felt like they were about to win again. Even though he had grown, Azurin was still much smaller than Onyxia, who had also grown, but at a much slower rate. She was still about 1.5 times his size, which made her tower over him in both height and length. The big black dragon came over and gave Naruto a gentle push with her nose. She turned her head to look at Naruto with one eye and asked, "Now, are you giving Hinata a fair chance?" The soldier with blonde hair took off his helmet and chain coif. "I am, of course." The dragon grumbled as the other one lay down gently and let Hinata scratch him right under the joint where his wings meet. Thanks. I can't quite reach right there," he said when she was done. Hinata smiled. She said, "No problem," as she gently rubbed that spot. As she looked at her friend, she smiled. It was nice to have someone she could always talk to and trust not to tell anyone her secrets. Kushina smiled and threw bottles of water to both riders. Tayuya slowly stood up, grunting softly as she did so. The chakra and magic surgery that Tsunade and Naruto did on Tayuya's legs was done, but she was still going through a full recovery process. She could move around on her own, but her legs were still stiff and hurt. Still, it was a lot better than having to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. The four people went back inside, and two of them were planning to take showers to clean up. As they went up the stairs, they could hear the seal at the estate gate being set off. When Kushina went to see who was calling, she found an Anbu messenger. The Anbu said, "Kushina-sama, you, Oni, and Hinata-san have been asked to come to a war meeting in an hour." Then it disappeared. Kushina sighed. She muttered softly as she went back inside, "Guess it was too much to hope that the peace would last." Even though the last 6 months were tense, the ceasefire held. Kumo had been building up its defenses in peace, happy to stay out of the war. Even more so when they found out that Konoha not only had Kiri's help, but also a second dragon rider. After losing the Sanbi and Ichibi, Akatsuki had also laid low. Even though they were sometimes seen, most of the time they were in remote areas, usually looking for bounties. Iwa's forces had moved back to defensive lines outside of Fire Country before sending a request to Konoha and Suna for a prisoner exchange. So they could protect their friends who were in prison, the Iwa shinobi stopped fighting and just waited while Iwa, Suna, and Konoha talked about the terms of the exchange. The only real fights were small ones with Otto, who lived to the north. Raids from both sides occasionally attacked outposts and patrols, but neither side had made any big moves. This gave Konoha time to rebuild some of its forces and strengthen its key defensive positions. Now, it looked like the fighting would start up again soon. After an hour, in the Konoha war room, the Hokage met with her top shinobi and military advisors in the Hokage's tower. When the doors opened, Kushina, Naruto, and Hinata walked in. They were talking about different plans. They all bowed to Tsunade, who replied with a nod. "Thank you for coming. Most of you probably know that we've ended our talks with Iwa. In 2 weeks, we'll meet in Grass Country to trade prisoners. After that, each side has agreed to at least 1 more week of peace before fighting starts up again. However, we've decided to use this time to our advantage. Shikaku Nara will explain," she said, turning to her Junin commander. Shikaku nodded as he stood. When the temporary ceasefire started, Otto pulled its own forces back inside its borders. "Thanks to Jiraiya-sama's spy network, we've been able to learn important things. The real village of Otto seems to be an underground complex here," he said, pointing to a map of the land of rice paddies. "It's in a pretty good defensive position. The area where this village is located is surrounded by mountains to the west and north, making attacks from those directions nearly impossible. The only level way into the village, from the south, is guarded by a very well-defended fortress. If we wanted to launch a full-scale attack with all our forces, we'd have to break this fortress first. However, there may be a second option. The east flank of Otto is protected by a..." Kushina blinked. "How does that work?" "The last time I checked, Kiri was known for its swords and water jutsu, not its mountain and cliff climbers. That's why it's good that our village is hidden on a big island," a woman said from behind her. They all turned to see a very pretty woman wearing a blue battle kimono with mesh armor underneath that fell off her shoulders. She had long, dark brown hair and blue eyeliner and lipstick. "Kushina Namikaze, meet Mei Terumi, the Yondaime Mizukage," Tsunade said, introducing them. Kushina bowed. "Sorry, I didn't see you there," she said, giving herself a gentle scold. Mei ignored it. "It's not a problem. But please, let me explain. Kiri has always been wary of the other 4 great nations. Because of this, our shinobi go through 2 kinds of training. One we let the world and its spies see, and the other we've kept a bit of a secret. We train our ninja to handle a wide range of terrains. More specifically, we train them to handle the terrains of each of the other 4 shinobi villages." Shikaku picked up where he left off. "This force of Kiri shinobi and a force of Konoha shinobi will be the strike force into Otto itself. They'll attack from the east. However, we'll need to try and weaken Otto's defenses. And in this case, that means depleting their manpower. So we'll launch a fake attack on their fortress to the south. We'll move shinobi northwards past the Valley of the End, making it look like we..." As Tsunade sat down in her chair, everyone gave her a quiet nod. "Kushina, I want you to lead the force of Konoha shinobi. You'll be working with Ao-san from Kiri, who is leading the Kiri strike force. The whole strike force will move out a week before I leave to oversee the prisoner exchange. Since we don't have a ceasefire agreement with Otto, feel free to launch the attack once all forces are in place. But you must make sure that the attack happens before the ceasefire with Iwa ends." Kushina nodded. She said, "It will be done," Hokage-sama, and she, Hinata, and Oni all bowed. They all left quickly to get ready. It's funny, you'd think they would have wanted to talk to Tayuya-chan about Otto, Naruto said when they got to the estate. Kushina gave a nod. She already told them everything she knew about Otto, and her information is about 6 years old. Who knows what has changed in that time? Naruto nodded quietly. Well, I guess we'll just have to see what's waiting for us. Hinata nodded quietly and was a little bit scared. Even though she had been in battle before, this was the first time she used her new skills outside of a training session. She took a big breath to calm herself down. She gave a soft smile when she thought of Azurin and felt his comforting presence. When they got back, Tayuya looked up. So, what's up? What did you talk about at the meeting? Kushina gave her a smile. You should know by now that we can't just tell you important secrets we may have learned, right? Kushina laughed as Tayuya crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. Okay, fine. The meeting was about a battle plan, though, so the 3 of us will be gone for a while, Kushina said. The good news is that this battle should help end the war faster and in our favor. Tayuya blinked. Right. And what am I supposed to do here all by myself? Naruto grinned. You could always invite Shino over, and maybe he'd finally ask you out, he joked, dodging the glass ball that was thrown at him. Tayuya was angry and red-faced as Hinata caught it. Kushina giggled. That's a great idea. You could go on a romantic dinner date, then go for a walk, and then kiss in front of a full moon. Make sure to take pictures for me. Tayuya got even redder. She yelled, Mom! And turned and hobbled away as fast as she could. Naruto and Kushina laughed out loud, and Hinata tried not to laugh. But they soon stopped having fun when they thought about what they had to do. They went to their rooms to get ready in silence. None of them knew that they were about to face what might have been their hardest battle so far. Konoha Hospital. Kiba held his dislocated shoulder and gave a soft grunt of pain. Shino hurt him because Kiba had asked him about his relationship with Tayuya, which Shino seemed to take as an insult. All I did was ask if they were at second base. As Kiba walked into the room where he would be cared for, he thought, you'd think I asked her to sleep with me or something. As he sat down on the bed, he sighed. After a few minutes, the door opened and a Kunoichi medic walked in. She turned around and shut the door, then turned back around and gasped. Oh. Kiba-san, she said, blushing a little and stuttering. Kiba blinked. He blinked at her strange behavior and asked, Do I know you? The girl chewed on her lip and held her clipboard close to her chest. I'm Mina Mikan. Our genin teams work together on a mission to guide some traders through dangerous territory? Kiba blinked and Mina, who was blushing, went on. My clothes and sleeping bag got wet during a rainstorm, so you gave me your blanket and some extra clothes, and then you and your partner Akamaru kept me warm? His eyes got bigger. He was shocked. That was you? He asked. Mina nodded, getting even redder. Wow, that happened about 5 years ago. Why haven't I seen you since then? Mina moved a stray piece of her brown hair out of her face with a brush. She stuttered, I've been busy, and then looked at her clipboard. So your shoulder is out of place? Kiba nodded. Yeah, my teammate Shino flipped me over onto my arm, he said, wincing. Mina looked at it when she came over. I see. Okay, well, this is going to hurt a little bit. She took his arm and, after giving him a chance to brace himself, pushed his shoulder back into place. Kiba groaned in pain and clenched his teeth. She looked away. Sorry, she said. Then she went to a cabinet to look for something. Kiba looked at her as she did it. He had to agree that Mina was pretty adorable. She had brown hair that was tied back in a ponytail like Shikamaru's, with a few stray hairs on her forehead. She put on her Konoha headband like a hairband, like a certain kunoichi with pink hair. Behind big glasses, her eyes were green. Her outfit was a normal kunoichi top with mesh elbow covers and a chunin flak vest over her shirt. She also wore shorts and a white skirt over her kunoichi boots. She came up with a sling in the end. She came over to him quietly and helped him put his arm in it. Let that arm rest for a few days, and you should feel fine after that, she said with a light blush. Kiba gave his arm a quick look. Wow, this is pretty good, he said as he stood up. Thanks. He said as he moved around and smiled. She got very red. Why, you're welcome, she said in a stutter. If the shoulder keeps hurting, please come back for a checkup, he said. She turned to leave, but tripped on her own feet and started to fall. Kiba caught her before she could fall and pulled her up with his good arm. "Careful," he said, not realizing that he was pushing her against him. As she slowly looked up, Mina's whole face turned red. She could feel Kiba's muscles through his coat and mesh shirt. Kiba seemed to understand what was going on all of a sudden and let her go. She took a few steps back and looked down while she blushed. "So," he said, "thanks again for this," pointing to the sling. "Hey, I'd like to take you out to eat or something as a thank you for helping me," he said with a smile, not sure why he had asked her that. Mina let out a gasp and looked up in shock. She just looked at him and then nodded. She said, with excitement in her voice, "Sure. I'd love to." He was happy. He said, "That's great. I'll see you out front." When she said yes, he walked away with a light blush. Why did I say that to her? Still, she's pretty, he thought. Back in the exam room, Mina screamed and spun around in a circle before falling over again and yelping. She laid on her back and looked up at the ceiling. He asked me to go eat with him. Yes. She said, laughing and blushing the whole time. Sakura stuck her head in when the door opened. "Mina? Are you okay?" Mina sat up. She stood up and said, "Jay, just fine, Sakura Ne-chan." Before running off to finish her shift. She had a smile on her face the whole time. Akatsuki headquarters. Itachi laid still on his bed and thought about everything that had happened recently. Like how close he'd gotten to Conan. Even though they were not dating, they were good friends. If Itachi was honest with himself, Conan was just as close to him as his family had been. Or at least the ones who hadn't been cocky fools. He was also worried about his eyes. His eyesight was very bad at the moment. Everything was fuzzy now except for what was close to him. He knew he couldn't keep going like this and would have to either let Sasuke kill him or go back to Konoha. He sat up when the door opened and Tobi walked in wearing a robe and a mask. Itachi let out a quiet sigh. He asked in a quiet voice, "What do you want, Madara-sama?" Madara turned his attention to Itachi. "You've been getting close to that woman friend of Pain's," he said. "I hope you're not getting off track from what we're trying to do." Itachi looked at Madara. "Don't try to trick me, Madara. We both know you know where my true loyalties are, and the only reason you haven't gotten rid of me yet is because you still need me for your plans." Madara shrugged. "As long as you don't work against me. But remember, if you do, those close to you will be in danger." Itachi just looked at him. "That's it?" Madara gave a slight nod. "Pain has fixed the statue. In 1 month, you will go with him and Kisame to get Naruto." He turned and left. Itachi sat there for a while, then closed his eyes and let out a sigh. He finally got around to opening them, and he started writing a message. Jiraiya had to figure out what was happening. And afterwards? He talked with Conan. She had to know what was really going on. Konoha prison. Naruto let out a quiet sigh. He couldn't really believe what he was doing. But Kushina had worn him down to the point where she told him to face Sasuke. So now he was getting close to Sasuke's cell. He stopped outside, took a deep breath, and then nodded to the guard. The guard opened the door. Sasuke looked up. A guard came in about 10 minutes ago and chained him to the bed. He could still get up and move, but only about 2 feet at a time. Now, the door opened, and a person with a hood over their head and a mask over their face walked in. The figure looked at Sasuke as the door closed. The Uchiha who was locked up just shrugged. He was angry and asked, "What are you looking at?" Even though the figure didn't move, it did talk. They moved to lean against the wall and said, "That's someone I hadn't expected to see for a long time. I haven't seen you in maybe 5 or 6 years." Sasuke gave him a hard look. "What would you like?" The person sighs. He said, "I'm here to face some old demons, which means you. You obviously don't recognize me, do you?" Sasuke snorted. "Unless you're Kakashi Hatake." The person laughed. "No, but I imagine he wouldn't want to see you at all. Didn't you break his motto? Those who break the rules are trash, but those who leave their friends are lower than trash. Guess that makes you lower than trash, hum?" Sasuke growled, but then stopped. "Wait. How did you know that was Kakashi's motto?" The person grinned. "I know because he taught it to me and 2 other people." "Can you figure it out now, or do I need to explain it?" Sasuke stared at him. You can't be him. He's dead." You can't be Naruto. Naruto laughed and took his mask off. He asked, "Are you sure about that, Teme?" Sasuke looked at Naruto's whisker marks, which had always been a way to tell him apart. "And no, you're dead. One of Orochimaru's shinobi killed you." "Almost. Teme, almost. If Kyuubi hadn't helped me, I would have died right away. Even with his help, I probably would have died anyway if a nearby hermit hadn't done what he did." Sasuke looked at him for a moment, but then his eyes got hard. "So, what are you going to do now? Beat me up? Take pride in the fact that I'm in jail while you become Hokage and get Sakura?" Naruto let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, I have no plans to go after Sakura or become Hokage. Thanks to you, Sasuke, those dreams are long gone. Instead, I'm here to ask you one simple question. Why?" Sasuke gave him a hard look. "What? Why?" Naruto was right in front of him, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him off his bed. "Why, you piece of crap? Why did you think it was so important to betray Konoha? What made you think you could betray your friends and allies?" Sasuke looked at him. He snarled, "I had to get revenge for my clan," but he was pushed against a wall. Naruto shouted back, "And that's why you think you have to leave Konoha? You don't think you could have done that in a village full of people who would have been happy to help you reach your goals?" Sasuke gave him a hard look. "This village was holding me back. I wasn't getting stronger, and you were passing me up. I had to get stronger to beat my brother." Naruto glared. "That's all you care about, isn't it? Fighting your damn brother. You don't care about anything else in this world as long as you kill your brother. Are you doing it for your clan or just for your own damn need?" As Naruto put him on his bed, Sasuke turned away. "That's what I thought. Sasuke, you're not doing this for your clan anymore. You're doing it because it's all you know and all you care about. You're just trying to prove to your brother and yourself that you're good enough." He walked away. He said as he turned away, "You know, Sasuke, I would have gladly helped you. You were like a brother to me. All you had to do was ask." Sasuke gave him a dirty look. "No one needs to help me, Dobi." Naruto dryly chuckled. "No, you don't," he replied in a soft voice. "Because you're not the Sasuke I knew. My brother died that day at the Valley of the End. You're just a fake who took his name," Naruto said as he banged on the door and raised his mask. "Goodbye, Uchiha." After that, he left. Sasuke looked back at where he had been and didn't know why he felt empty on the inside. Naruto put his back against the wall and took a few deep breaths. He took a deep breath, then walked away. He had to get ready for a battle. Rice Country, after 1 week. The Nidaime Otokage didn't have power for very long before the fortress of Sandobaria was built. It was a large fortification that was built to protect the area. Even though it wasn't nearly as big as some of Iwa's forts, it was just as strong, if not stronger. Instead of having straight edges that made a square or pentagon, the walls of the fortress made a circle. The keep was a large building that looked like a tower in the middle. Several smaller buildings lined the inside of the wall and were used for storage and other things. 200 of Oto's best shinobi worked at the fortress. Even so, after the peace treaty between Iwa and Konoha, Oto added another 100 shinobi to the fortress to make it stronger. About 20 were on guard duty at the moment, while the rest trained, rested, or just hung out. But even when they were resting, they were pretty tense. The 400 Konoha shinobi who had gathered on the other side of the Valley of the End was the reason why. One of the guards leaned against the wall and let out a quiet sigh. His eyes slowly moved around the south, looking for any sign of the enemy. Since he had missed breakfast this morning, he couldn't wait for his shift to end. He closed his eyes and felt the sun's warmth. He closed his eyes when he heard a soft whooshing sound. He looked up just in time to see the huge fireball hit where he was standing, burning him to death and sending flames over 20 feet into the air. Above, 2 dragons circled and roared as alarms went off in the fortress and the shinobi ran to their battle stations. It was time to attack the land of rice paddies. The fortress of Sandobaria, which was run by the Oto, was a place of chaos. Shinobi were running all over the place, either to try to stop this attack or to try to put out the fires. Above, Naruto and Hinata continued to circle the fortress on their dragons, making strafing runs on the supply buildings along the wall, the defensive positions along the wall, and the people who lived in the fortress. Naruto leaned a little to the left to keep his balance as Onyxia banked to the right and circled back to attack the fortress again. As they got closer, a few kunai and shuriken were shot up at them, but most of them missed by a good distance. The few that did hit on Nixia's hide just bounced off the scales of her armor. One did hit the membrane of her wing, and Naruto could feel her wince in pain. Naruto snarled at the person who had thrown the weapon, making it clear who it was. With just one word from the ancient language, that man fell to the ground, his brain turning to jelly. Hinata, who was on the other side of the fortress and higher up, gave Azurin a nod. She pointed to a building along the wall and said, "Go to that storage building there." Azurin made a sharp dive with his wings folded back against his body. Soon, he and Hinata were just a blur of blue. Around them, the wind whistled and shrieked and blew Hinata's hair around. Azurin roared and then threw a single fireball at the target, which was about 100 feet away. Before the whole building blew up, it tore through the roof of the storage shed. Azurin spread his wings and stopped diving. Hinata turned around to see how bad the attack had been. As she did this, a kunai flew by her head and came close to hitting her cheek. She looked up to see where the kunai came from and saw that several shinobi had climbed to the top of the central tower of the fortress. They were higher than the two riders, so they rained weapons down on them. Hinata pointed to the top of the tower, so Naruto gave her a nod. She got off of Azurin while he helped Nixia climb. As he sped past them on his way up, the shinobi on top of the tower started focusing their attacks on him. Azurin was holding on to the side of the tower, but no one saw her. But they did hear him roar before the dragon shot flames at them from right in front of it. The burning shinobi screamed in pain as he fell over the sides and smashed into the ground. Azurin climbed to the top of the tower and saw the doorway that led into the fortress. He let out a steady stream of flames inside. The shinobi on the ground floor of the fortress cringed as flames shot out of several windows on the top floors. As the shinobi on those floors went up in flames, more screams could be heard. Above, Naruto saw the damage that Azurin had done. He gave himself a quiet nod, but was startled when a big bolt shot by him. Down below, some shinobi had made it to some of the defenses that were still working. In this case, small mounted ballistae or scorpions that could shoot shafts about a foot in diameter and 4 feet long. They could cut right through a person, and they could even cut through the hide of one of their dragons. Or, even worse, they could tear through the wing's thin membrane. Nixia rolled away just as a second bolt tore through the space where her right wing had been. She went down, rolling and turning until she was facing the defensive position head-on. One of the two scorpions had been reloaded and was now aiming at them before shooting. As the bolt came at them, Naruto put up one hand. Gath Sem Oro Unlam Iet. Means, bring that arrow together with my hand. The bolt looked like it slowed down and turned, so it was moving sideways and right into Naruto's hand. He stood on his back legs and held it like a javelin. Then, he used chakra to throw it back. As the bolt tore through the scorpion and destroyed it, the two shinobi who were controlling it had to jump away. The other launcher was pointed at Naruto, so he turned his hand and pointed it at it. With just a thought, the shinobi in charge of the wooden launcher made it light up in black flames, causing him to curse and jump away. As he flew over, Naruto laughed. Hinata and Azurin, on the other hand, were in a shallow dive and heading toward the fortress's central tower. Hinata pulled out a kunai to which she had attached several tags that would blow up when they were hit. As Azurin turned away, she threw it as hard as she could. The kunai went through a window and hit a wall on the other side. Within seconds, there was a huge explosion that ripped through the tower and was powerful enough to break the walls. The top 30 feet of the tower slowly started to lean over, and the whole tower shook as if it were in its final moments. Slowly, the part on top, which was still on fire from Azurin's attack from above, tipped and fell. Down below, Otto Shinobi ran away from falling rocks and flames. The stone tower hit the ground with a loud thud, ripping a huge hole in the wall and crushing several shinobi beneath it. As smoke began to rise from the fortress, burning pieces of debris spread the flames. The two dragons slowly climbed up above the damage they and their riders had caused. Naruto looked around the fortress and then gave Hinata a nod. They put their dragons to sleep and headed south, back to where the Konoha force was camped between the land of fire and the land of rice paddies. Otto, after 4 hours. The Nidame Otokage took a look at the messenger standing in front of him. Oh, I see. So the fortress of Sandoberia was almost completely destroyed? He asked the messenger in a smooth voice that made him shiver. Why yes, Otokage-sama, that's right. The shinobi who survived the attack won't be able to defend the fortress against the Konoha attack force that's camped on the other side of the Valley of the En. The commander hopes you'll tell them to leave, the messenger said with his head bowed. The man in front of him put his feet up on his throne. This is very unfortunate. I was hoping they would last longer, but it doesn't matter much. Konoha will still have to fight their way to us. Tell the commander he can retreat further up the valley, but he must set up a new defensive position and hold it. I will send more troops to reinforce his position. The messenger nodded and ran away as the Otokage sat back and thought deeply. So, Konoha. Your valuable mercenaries were able to break down the last thing that stood between your army and my village. But how well will they be able to fight underground and without their scaly friends? We'll see, he said with a dark laugh as he thought about the battle that was coming. Kiri Base Camp, after 2 days. The group of Kiri ninjas was camping in a large wooded area about 10 miles east of the cliffs they would be climbing. The army was waiting for information from their scouts about what Oto would do in response to Hinata and Naruto's attack on the fortress Sandobaria together. Kushina was sitting in the commander's tent and reading reports. Depending on what Oto did, the plan seemed easy enough. If Oto strengthened the fortress, the Konoha forces would attack it, and then the Kiri shinobi would climb the cliff using ropes attached to grapnel hooks fired from special chakra launchers. They would attack Oto in the middle of the night. If Oto didn't strengthen the fortress and instead pulled back his troops, the Konoha forces would move up and attack Oto, trying to get as many enemy shinobi to leave before Kiri attacked at night. She leaned back and sighed softly. In either case, she would need the help of these shinobi to get up the cliff. Onyxia and Azurin couldn't help with the coming attack because Oto was almost completely underground. So it was decided that they would stay back and only move forward if they had to. Kushina looked up as the ranking Kiri shinobi walked in. Kushina-sama, our scouts just told us that the Oto shinobi in the fortress are leaving. However, they are not going back to Oto. They are going to a new position north of the fortress that is already held by some Oto troops. Kushina nodded. Send a message to the commander of the Konoha force. Tell them to attack the Oto force when they can. We'll attack Oto after they attack the shinobi who are already in place. The Junin nodded and bowed, then left to do what she told him to do. She sat back and looked at the map, biting her lip as she looked at where Oto was. As she got up to go for a walk, she muttered, I hope things go as planned, or at least close enough. If she had known what was going to happen, she might have found a reason not to go to Oto. 2 nights later, cliffside. The night was quiet. The moon was hidden by clouds, which made its light less bright on the ground. Even a breeze couldn't move the leaves on the trees. Soon, there were a few quiet clanks that broke the night's silence. A few small dark objects came over the top of the cliff and hit the ground, then were slowly pulled back to the edge. As they got stuck on different protruding rocks, they would stop and feel safe. If someone was on top of the cliff and looked over the edge, they would see a huge group of black bugs at the bottom that were quickly climbing the ropes. They got to the top quickly and quietly. As soon as the first person reached the top of the climb, he or she quickly climbed onto solid ground and turned around to help the people behind them. All of them wore navy blue and black clothes, and ash and soot covered their headbands, weapons, and any skin that wasn't covered. In half an hour, everyone had climbed up the cliff. 3 people led them. Kushina, who was dressed like a Kiri shinobi, and Naruto and Hinata, both of whom were in full armor. Both of them had also dulled their armor so that it wouldn't reflect any light. With a silent nod from Kushina, the whole group moved west in silence, keeping an eye out for enemy patrols or sentries. They could see the small campfires from the Oto camp, which was where the people were who were keeping the Konoha force back. The Konoha force had started its own attack that morning, first harassing and probing the Oto's defensive line. At midday, they attacked with all their strength, but then they had to retreat. Small battles went on for the rest of the day, but when night came, both sides pulled back. The Kiri shinobi went a little north on their way to their goal. About an hour later, they were all gathered in the trees and bushes south of the entrance to Oto. Nearby, the bodies of 2 Oto guards who had been killed quietly from behind were lying on the ground. Kushina quietly looked at the entrance and then turned to Naruto, Hinata, and the Kiri commanders. There could be 20 different traps on that entrance, and we wouldn't even know it, she whispered. Hinata made her Byakugan work. I see a pair of seals facing each other, but they don't put out much chakra. They're connected to a group of seals further in that face the entrance and put out more chakra. I think they're some kind of storage trap seal, she said. Naruto had a good look at it. I could have some clones rush in and set off the traps, but that would give the enemy time to plan their defense and counterattack. Kushina nodded. Then I'll take care of it, she said. She pulled out a couple of tags and hopped down quietly. She crept up on the entrance and moved slowly so she wouldn't run into the seal by accident. The others watched as she quietly put the tags on the walls near the security tags and then moved back. When she did, she made the sign for a ram. The 2 tags sent out a small pulse of chakra that was very localized and couldn't be picked up by anyone. Before going dark again, the 2 security seals on the wall lit up. As Kushina waved for the others to come over, nothing else happened. Naruto knelt down next to her quickly and blinked. He looked at the seals and asked, "What did you use?" She gave a grin. "Special seals that your dad and I worked on together. They send out a special pulse of chakra that can be used to disable nearby seals in genjutsu," she said as she slowly slipped inside. All of the Kiri shinobi slowly moved in behind her. Kushina turned to face the leaders of the shinobi. "Okay, everyone, get your platoons and spread out. Take prisoners if you can, but our goal is to stop Otto from being a threat. Hinata-san and Oni and I will go after the Otokage. Now go." The shinobi nodded and began to move as quietly and carefully as they could through the passages they found. Kushina looked over at Naruto and Hinata and gave them a nod. "Where is the Otokage, Hinata?" Hinata turned on her Byakugan and scanned the complex below ground. She said, "The path ahead will lead us to him." Kushina nodded, and everyone moved forward slowly. As he walked down a hall, an Otto Chunin yawned softly. He had just finished his shift in one of the Otokage's labs, where he made sure none of the living experiments got away. He was looking forward to sleeping for a long time. As he turned the corner, someone grabbed him from behind. While he was in a sleeper hold, one hand was put over his mouth. Even though he tried hard, he couldn't get away, and he soon fell asleep. As the rest of the platoon left, a Kiri shinobi began to drag him away. A pair of Chunin talked to each other as they left the mess hall in another hall. While they were talking, they didn't notice the figure above them until it reached down and hit them both on the head. As a group moved away from the mess hall, 2 more people pulled them away. 2 of them took out tags on kunai and threw them into the mess hall when their platoon leader gave them the okay. After a few seconds, the tags made a bright flash and a loud bang. The Kiri shinobi ran into the mess hall to stop the people who were still there. Unfortunately, one of the Otto shinobi was near the edge of the blast and was only slightly confused. As he shook his head to get rid of the ringing in his ears, he saw the Kiri shinobi rush in. He cursed and hit a palm against a wall, sending chakra into it. Alarms went off all over the base, letting the people there know that something was wrong. When Kushina heard the alarm, she swore. As the group charged forward, she pulled her sword from its scabbard on her back and said, "Well, there goes the subtle approach." The Otto shinobi were arming themselves with weapons and running around the underground base to find the people who had broken into their home. Now that their cover was blown, the Kiri shinobi moved with less stealth. Soon, fights broke out all over the base between shinobi from Kiri and Otto. Hinata led Naruto, Hinata, and Kushina as they ran down the hallways. They had just walked into a big room when someone in a cloak fell down and hit Kushina, knocking her away. She got back on her feet and held her katana in a taijutsu stance as she stood up. Hinata and Naruto both turned around to help her, but she shook her head. She told them, "Go, kill the Otokage quickly. I'll take care of this," and they did. Naruto thought for a moment, then nodded and walked away, with Hinata following. Kushina stood ready with her katana and looked at the figure in the cloak and hood. The person in the shadow seemed to look back, but their face was completely hidden by the shadow their hood cast. Kushina let out a soft growl. "Well, come on. I don't have all fucking day," she said, showing where her daughter got her temper and maybe some of her swearing. The figure looked like it was unsure at first, but then it pulled out a kunai and attacked. Naruto and Hinata had gone through a few hallways, with Hinata using the Byakugan to find traps so they could avoid them. But when they got to another big room, Hinata had to duck out of the way of a fast palm strike to the head. She hit the attacker back with her palm, but he jumped over her and rolled away. Hinata stood up and slowly unrolled the scroll she was using to carry her mother's blades. Hinata stopped Naruto from picking up his own sword as she looked at the cloaked and hooded figure. "Naruto, I've got this," she said softly. "You should go to Otokage." Naruto gave a growl. He said, "This has to be a trick. He's trying to split us up." Hinata nodded. I know, but we don't have much of a choice, do we? If he gets away, Otto dies. He finally nodded. Well, if you insist, be careful. Hinata didn't say anything as she took out her mother's twin hook swords. The figure seemed to stiffen, and then it took a position that looked too much like the Hyuga Juken position. When they charged, they faced each other. Naruto ran ahead, happy that the path to the Otokage was clear. He could see the doors to the man's throne room ahead of him. As he ran, he put his sword away and held out his right hand, which was filled with chakra. With a roar, he smashed the wooden doors open with his father's signature jutsu. As the black armored figure walked in, the robed figure of the Otokage looked up. Ah, you're finally here, he said in a smooth voice. Naruto just stood there, ready to use his sword and shield. You're the Otokage? You don't look like much. The person grinned. When I first met you, I thought the same thing about you, too. Naruto got a little tense. Whose are you? As he slowly got off the throne, the man laughed. He didn't stand on two legs, though. Instead, the lower part of his body looked like a snake's. Slowly, the figure slithered into the light of the torch and pulled his hood back. Do you recognize me now? Naruto's eyes got really big. Kabuto, who used to be Orochimaru's right-hand man, was standing in front of him. But this Kabuto was very different from the one he had seen when he went to get Tsunade. The skin of this Kabuto was pale and scaly, just like the skin of a snake. His face was also slightly jutting out, making it look like a snout. His eyes were now yellow, and his pupils looked like the eyes of a reptile. Kabuto laughed and put out his arms. What do you think, Naruto? After Sasuke killed Orochimaru-sama, I added some of his DNA to mine. For a while, his DNA tried to take over mine, but I won. Now I am better than Orochimaru in every way. Naruto just held his sword in his hand. You've become a bigger monster than Orochimaru for sure, that's a fact. He put his arms down. The smartest people have always been thought of as monsters, he said. That's a sad truth of this world. If the greatest minds had maybe some morals, they wouldn't be considered monsters, would they? Naruto replied. Morality? That's for the weak and misguided, for those who really believe that teamwork and friendship can beat people who are stronger than them. If I had any morals, your mother and that Hyuga girl would be fighting me with you. Instead, they'll die at the hands of people who are close to them, he said with a wicked smile. That made Naruto's eyes get bigger. What do you mean? With Kushina. The Uzumaki with red hair stumbled back and gasped a bit. Whoever she was fighting was good, like, really good. He had dodged her attacks and used a kunai to fight back. He seemed to know everything she did. The figure stood on the other side, and it didn't seem at all tired or upset by her attacks. She gave him a close look. So, who are you? For an Auto Shinobi, you're pretty strong, she teased, hoping to get a response. The figure didn't say anything, so Kushina sighed and attacked again. She tried to quickly cut her opponent in the stomach, but the figure jumped back, so she quickly cut up. The person's head leaned back, and their hood fell off. As the figure stood up straight again, Kushina got ready, but then she stopped, her eyes wide. Her katana fell out of her numb hands and clanged as she looked at her husband's blue eyes and spiky blonde hair. Minato? Minato Namikaze, who used to be the Yondaime Hokage and is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze's father, gave his wife a sad smile. Hello, Benihime, he said, calling her by one of his nicknames. And Hinata. Hinata carefully looked at her opponent as they went around each other. So far, they had only been making small moves and watching each other. Hinata's twin hook swords gave her the upper hand in both range and damage. But the person she was fighting knew how to use the Hyuga Juken and seemed to have been fighting for years. Hinata charged at her opponent and swung both of her blades toward her opponent from her sides. Unluckily, that enemy got in the way of her attack, grabbed her wrists, and then hit Hinata in the head. She fell back in pain and accidentally let go of her swords. The figure also fell back, but it had already grabbed the hook swords and taken a position. Hinata shook her head and went to get her rider sword, but she stopped and thought about two things. The first was that the figure's hood had come off, revealing a Hyuga woman. The second one completely stopped her in her tracks. The Hyuga woman was her mother. She looked at the figure with her mouth open and her eyes a little bit watery. She whispered, Mom? Hitomi Hyuga cursed in her mind as she slowly stood up straight that her hood had fallen off. she whispered, Hinata, as she looked into her daughter's eyes with sadness. Naruto and Kabuto. Naruto gave a growl. You four-eyed jerk, it will be fun to kill you. Kabuto had a laugh. Oh, I doubt you'll be able to, Naruto. Oh, I've heard of your exploits thus far, but quite honestly, I'm sure they are an exaggeration. Not only that, but each time you fought, you had your pet helping you, did you not? And now, here you are. Fighting me all by yourself. Me, who has surpassed Orochimaru and become the strongest shinobi in the... Kabuto was interrupted by the blast of black fire that erupted around him and engulfed him. Naruto growled and held out one hand of his gauntlet while his eyes turned red. 1. Don't ever call Onyxia my pet. She's my partner and sister all in one. 2. You need to shut the hell up. Your bragging and your voice are giving me a fucking headache. And 3. Don't ever mess with my friends and family. As the fire died down, all that was left was Kabuto's burning cloak. Naruto took out his sword and shield and waited for Kabuto to attack in silence. As he slowly looked up, the monster that was half human and half snake lunged at him from behind a column. Minato and Kushina. Kushina's katana just barely stopped her husband's kunai, and she was pushed back a few steps. She just stood there and looked at him, shocked and sad. She asked, What are you doing here? What's going on? Minato gave a nod. The Otokage brought me back to life with the Nidaim's Impure World Resurrection Jutsu. I can't control myself, he told her with a sad look. The only good thing is that he wasn't able to copy my Hiraishin seals, so you won't have to worry about that jutsu. Kushina just trembled. I can't fight against you, Minato. The look on Minato's face changed. Damn it, Kushina, you have to. If you don't beat me, Konoha will use me against them, which I don't want. Please, stop me. Kushina just shook a little bit as she stared in horror at her dead lover. Slowly, her eyes got more serious as she nodded, and then she went back to her normal kenjutsu stance. Minato gave a soft smile, then lunged forward and attacked again. Minato dodged under Kushina's block, which led to a counterattack. He turned around and tried to give Kushina a roundhouse kick, but Kushina jumped over his leg and gave him a kickback, hitting him in the face and sending him back several feet. Minato got better quickly and was already making hand signs. Wind style, slicing blades jutsu. Kushina held her sword up and small blades of wind shot at her. It lit up as she sent chakra through it. Then she took a step forward and slashed at each wind blade that came at her as she ran toward Minato. She appeared out of nowhere and cut at his neck. He leaned back, and as her blade went through his stomach, he grunted in pain. As each blade of wind moved away, Kushina's eyes were closed. She whispered, Uzumaki Kenjutsu Art, Mirage, as a tear fell from her eye. But when Minato spoke, her eyes opened wide. I'm not dead yet, he said, before striking at her. She backflipped away and pulled out her katana as Minato stumbled a bit, the hole in his stomach slowly closing back up. He looked up at Kushina, his eyes filled with sadness. I'm sorry, he said in a whisper while making a hand sign. Minato had put a seal on Kushina, and when it went off, it shocked her. As electricity danced over her body, she screamed in pain, fell to her knees, and twitched. Minato moved slowly forward while crying and raising a kunai, but Kushina disappeared into smoke. Shadow clone. Minato turned just in time to catch a boot to the face, which sent him flying into a wall. Kushina was the one who finished the hand signs. Fire style, Grand Tiger's Claw. She made a big tiger shape out of flames that came out of her mouth. It roared at Minato, then ran at him and swung a huge paw at him. Minato just barely got away, but his cloak did catch on fire. He threw it away and watched it go up in flames. He looked at Kushina, who had a sad smile on her face. Over the past year or so, I've picked up a few new skills. Minato just nodded. Impressive, he said, and then two of his own shadow clones came out of nowhere and charged Kushina. Kushina looked at them and almost immediately knew what Minato was going to do. As the two clones ran at her, she shut her eyes. In two bright flashes, she took a half step forward and held out her sword to the right. Both clones turned into smoke, and then another Minato with a Rasengan came out of the smoke. Kushina ran at him with her sword drawn. As they got closer, time seemed to slow down. Kushina slowly opened her eyes and met Minato's gaze before the two of them went head to head. Hinata and Hitomi. Hinata stumbled back and moved out of the way of one of the hook swords that was trying to grab her leg. She stepped back and used her elven scimitar to block the other one. Her mother kept coming at her with graceful and fluid attacks, so Hinata had to use all of her experience and skills to stay out of the way. Hitomi was crying as she attacked Hinata, but she didn't stop. "I'm sorry, my sunshine. I didn't want to see you again like this," she said as she struck down with both swords. Hinata just about stopped them, but she had to work hard as her mother pushed down with both swords. Hinata kept squinting and shutting her eyes before she could open them. Her right hand lit up as she pushed it toward her mother. With a blast of magic, she pushed her mother away. Hitomi flipped over and skidded back when she landed. She looked at her daughter slowly. She asked in a soft voice, "What was that?" Hinata made a fist with her left hand. "I recently picked up a little something," she said. Hitomi just nodded and then attacked again by linking the sword's hooks together and swinging one of the swords at Hinata in a fast circle over and over. Hinata started to dance back, but she ran into the wall. She used her sword to block the spinning blade, but the force of the hit knocked it out of her hand. She cursed and tried to move to the side, but the dagger point on the handle of the right sword blocked her. She desperately tried to get out of the way of another slash, but a second slash caught her arm and cut her sleeve, making it bleed. Hinata rolled away from her mom, winced, and grabbed her arm as she did so. She softly breathed out and looked up at Hitomi, who had taken her place again. Hitomi's face was filled with shock and despair as she looked at her daughter. Hinata slowly got to her feet, holding her arm as she softly breathed out. She said, "Mom, you have to fight this. You can't let someone have this much power over you." Hitomi sobbed in private. "I'm sorry, Hinata. I'm trying, I really am, but my body isn't listening to me at all. Please, you have to stop me. You have to stop me no matter what." Hinata gave a nod. "I can't. I'm not going to fight you." Hitomi cried as her body jerked forward and rushed toward Hinata. Hinata bit her lower lip, and then her eyes got bigger and she put her left hand up. "I only have one chance at this. Naruto and Kabuto." Naruto grunted and moved away from Kabuto's tongue, which had grown and turned into a snake-like python. Kabuto smiled as the tongue went back into its mouth. "Naruto, you are no match for us." Naruto didn't respond. Instead, he put out his left hand, which cracked the pillar Kabuto was wrapped around and made it start to fall. Kabuto unwound himself from it and jumped to the ground, slithering toward another pillar. As he did, Naruto's sword stabbed down through his tail, making him scream in pain. He turned around and shot snakes at Naruto's face with his right arm. The blonde swung his shield over his left shoulder and stopped the snakes with it. They hit his shield and then wrapped around it, ripping it off his arm and throwing him off balance. Naruto fell, but when he got back up, his leg and back muscles screamed in protest for a moment. From his perch, Kabuto watched him. "Oh, Naruto-kun, come on. Are these lame tricks and that sword all you have now?" Naruto gave him a hard look. "Be careful what you wish for," he said, forming a Rasengan with his left hand. Then, all of a sudden, he shot out his hand and yelled, "Losna, release." When he let go of the Rasengan, it shot forward and hit the pillar right where Kabuto had been. The human-snake hybrid had jumped away, but shards of rock were still hitting him, and some of them cut through his skin. He looked straight at Naruto, who laughed. "Face it, Kabuto. You've never been a real fighter. Before you turned into this, you may have had the strength, speed, and stamina of Kakashi Hatake, but almost all of your jutsus were support or diversionary based. Your only combat-capable jutsu were those chakra scalpels. Now, you're even less a fighter than you were. Your abilities are all support-based," Naruto said, smirking. 3. Kabuto gave a growl. "I don't need fancy jutsu to beat you. I've become a god among shinobi," he shouted, slamming his hands down and calling up 2 large snakes that shot at Naruto. Naruto jumped at them and used his sword to stab one in the head while kicking the other. He didn't want the sword to go as far back as it did, but it did, cutting deep and drawing blood. The other snake's face was cut up by the 3 claws on his armored foot. Naruto landed, turned, and slashed right into the mouth of the first snake, which had quickly turned around to attack him. Its head flew off and smashed into the ground, and then the whole summon vanished. The other spell shot through the smoke and quickly wrapped around Naruto, making him drop his sword. Naruto struggled and groaned as the snake started to slowly crush him. As Kabuto finished making the hand signs for his next jutsu, he smiled. He thought with evil pleasure, "Even if you get away from that snake, let's see how you handle this. Naruto muttered as he started to call up Kyuubi's chakra. As he slowly pushed with his clawed gauntlets into the snake's scaly skin, a bubbling red aura started to form around him. As Naruto dug in, it hissed in pain. Then he yelled and pushed his hands outward. When he pushed, the snake broke into pieces and sprayed blood all over Naruto and the area. Then, that summon also disappeared. When Naruto looked back at Kabuto, he was shocked to see a coffin rise up from the ground. Slowly, the top came off, showing the figure inside. When the person in black clothes came out, Naruto's eyes hardened. "So. It's you," he said in a low voice. Hiruzen Sarutobi, who used to be the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha, asked, "Who are you?" Kushina and Minato. They were standing across from each other with their backs to each other. Kushina was holding her sword off to the side when she screamed in pain, dropped her sword, and grabbed her left arm, which had been broken by Minato's Rasengan. Minato's right arm, which was still being held, slowly fell off, hit the floor, and broke up into a lot of dirt and other things. Kushina slowly turned to face her husband, who was also turning to face her. She was out of breath and holding her left arm. His face showed how horrified and hurt he was by what he was forced to do. Kushina slowly let go of her left arm, leaned down, and picked up her katana again. As she did this, she saw Minato's arm growing back. Minato looked at his arm and then at Kushina. "Kushina, you can't beat me like this. You have to stop my body. You have to seal my body away so I can't move at all," he told her as he felt his right hand draw a kunai. Kushina just shook from pain and a little bit of fear. Her clan was good at sealing, but she wouldn't be able to do something like that without time, especially since she only had one good arm. She took a deep breath and thought of an idea. She used her stored chakra to make 3 shadow copies of herself. The shadow clones, on the other hand, did not have a broken arm like she did. They attacked, which kept Minato busy. Slowly, Kushina got down on the ground, grabbed a scroll, and wrote as quickly as she could with her one good arm. Minato ducked under one of the clone swords, but he could only just stop a kick with his arms. He pushed back, sending him sliding away as the 3 shadow clones kept attacking. Minato took out a second kunai and ran at the man. He blocked a sword blow from one and then stabbed it, killing the clone. Then he turned around and kicked another in the face. The last one jumped back and used a jutsu to shoot a fireball at him. He rolled to one side and then threw a kunai at the clone. It tried to stop it, but Minato's punch went into its stomach and broke it apart. Minato turned to Kushina, but a smoke bomb hit him in the face. He took a few steps back because of the blow and the smoke in his eyes, mouth, and nose. The scroll Kushina was writing on suddenly shot through the smoke and wrapped itself around his middle. It stopped at the seal Kushina drew on his chest, where she then slammed her fist and put her last bit of chakra. Uzumaki full binding seal. Minato froze and fell over, unable to move a single muscle. He gave a sad smile to Kushina, who was out of breath and on her knees. He whispered, "You did it." "Thank you," but he was still stuck there. Kushina just slowly moved back against a wall, panting, and gave a weak nod as she tried to put her arm in a splint. Minato looked at her with sadness as she did this. "Kushina-chan, do you know what happened to Naruto?" Kushina gave a sigh. She said half-jokingly, "It's a long story, and since neither of us is going anywhere, I have time to tell it." Hinata and Hitomi. Hitomi was lying on the floor and was being held there by magic. Hinata, who cast the spell, was leaning against a wall and panting as she held the long cut on her chest. She had moved too slowly to completely stop her mother's attack, but she had moved back far enough to lessen the damage. She tried to heal the wound by whispering the words of a healing spell. Hitomi was amazed, proud, and sad when she looked at her daughter. She said quietly, "You've become very strong, my little sunny place," as Hinata was forced to stop healing her wound. Her magical power was still not as strong as Naruto's, and the spell to bind Hitomi had used up most of her power. Hinata gave her mom a quick glance. She said in a soft voice, "It hasn't been easy. Before I could get this far, I had to learn some hard truths." Hitomi nodded and looked at her swords, which were lying close by. "If you took my swords from the memorial shrine, they must have been very hard. Care to tell me?" Hinata did nothing but sit down and nod quietly. She started slowly. Naruto and Kabuto. As he took off his helmet, Naruto just let out a growl. "Maybe you'll recognize me now, Sarutobi," he said, showing his face. Because of Kyuubi's chakra, His eyes were glowing red, the birthmarks on his whiskers were getting bigger, and his canine teeth had also grown. The former Sandaime Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Is that you, Naruto? Wow, you've grown and changed a lot," he said as he looked him over. Naruto just nodded. "Sarutobi, it's been 5 years since you died, and a lot has changed in that time," he said, looking at Kabuto. "So this is the person you're sending to fight me? Are you kidding me?" Kabuto smirked. "I know you won't ever hurt your favorite grandfather figure, would you?" he said in a joking way. Naruto's answer was to suddenly appear in front of Sarutobi and thrust his sword straight through the chest of the old zombie, then pull it out with a sideways cut. Even though this didn't kill Sarutobi, it hurt him a lot and made him useless until the damage healed. He looked at Kabuto. "You're not up to date. I found out that his man spread false information about me, which stopped the people who were supposed to take care of me from doing their jobs. He also tried to steal my father's techniques, which were supposed to go to me when I became a genin. This man is a traitor who put the safety of the village ahead of my family's wishes and my own freedom and life." Sarutobi let out a sigh. He asked, "So you found out, did you?" "Oh, I did, you old jerk. I found out a lot. And guess what? Your plan failed, thanks to your old student Orochimaru. Because of him, I'm no longer a shinobi working for Konoha. Instead, I'm a mercenary working for them until the war with Otto and Iwa is over," Naruto said, rubbing salt in the old man's wounds. As Sarutobi finished regenerating, he growled and got ready to use a jutsu. "Then I'll have to make sure you can't become a threat to Konoha after this war is over." He inhaled to release a powerful fire jutsu, then threw a roaring fireball at Naruto. The blonde in armor was burned up, and it looked like this was the end for Naruto. Until the flames went out and Naruto was left without even a piece of burned clothing or a burn mark. He raised his left hand and used his magic to split the flames. Now, he spoke quietly while clenching his fist. The ground rose up and wrapped around Sarutobi, pulling him deep underground. Naruto looked at Kabuto and put his helmet back on as he did so. "Don't count on him coming back to help you. He's buried 200 feet below the ground with so much rock, dirt, and earth on him that he'll never be able to move even a centimeter. It's just you and me," Naruto said, drawing his sword and shield again. For the first time, Kabuto was scared. Even though he was showing off and bragging, he knew Naruto was right. Almost all of his skills were related to the role of support. Since he fused with Orochimaru's DNA, he wasn't a frontline fighter. As he shot snakes at Naruto, his mind raced to find a way out of this. Naruto just raised his shield and hit the snakes away with it, then cut them in half. Kabuto stepped back, then smashed his hands into the ground. Hundreds of snakes jumped out of the ground and shot blades at Naruto from their mouths. Naruto grunted as he made 3 shadow clones that stood in front of him with their swords drawn. Each person raised both hands and yelled, "Brin's GR." A huge wave of black flames rushed forward and burned the snakes in the middle 15 feet of the group. Naruto jumped over his clones and through the gap, which caught Kabuto by surprise. The snake-human hybrid was getting ready to use the jutsu that would let him get away when Naruto came out from behind the wall of flames his clones had made and slashed Vinder down at him. Kabuto's first instinct was to throw his arms up. The curved ebony blade cut through skin, muscle, and bone, sending a spurt of blood into the air. Kabuto screamed as both of his hands fell to the floor, leaving behind bloody stumps. Before he could do anything, Naruto cut him open with a knife. When Naruto stabbed Kabuto, the force of his attack sent the blade into the wall behind him, pinning him there. Naruto slowly let go of his sword as he watched Kabuto struggle weakly, blood dripping from the wound in his stomach and the stumps that used to be his hands and forearms. Kabuto begged, and blood dripped from his mouth. Naruto slowly raised one hand. Please, Naruto, spare me. I can help against Iwa." He sputtered, spewing blood onto the floor. He didn't have the least bit of pity in his eyes. He said, "Fuck you, Kabuto," and then slammed his gauntlet-covered hand with claws through Kabuto's head. The steel and muscle broke through the flesh and bone, and Kabuto's brain went all over the wall and Naruto's hand. Naruto slowly pulled his hand out of the mess of wall and brain matter. Then, to make sure Kabuto was really dead, he set fire to his body. He slowly took his sword out of its sheath and turned to go find Hinata and Kushina. As he walked out of the throne room, he could hear the base cheering in silence. The fight was over for Otokagor no Sato. He was now the only one standing. Naruto, Sasuke, and Itachi. 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 Naruto, Sasu Both the camp of the shinobi from Konoha and Kiri's forces were full of joy. After Kabuto was killed, the rest of the Oto forces gave up. The Kiri shinobi had gone through the whole underground facility and stolen everything before setting it on fire. Then, they moved south, caught the group that was distracting the Konoha shinobi from behind, and made them give up. Oto had no leader and almost no shinobi left to fight, so he was officially out of the war. But 3 people in this winning group were anything but happy or excited. After the battle, Kushina, Hinata, and Naruto were able to take care of each other's wounds. Their emotional wounds, on the other hand, took a lot longer to heal. Both Hitomi and Minato didn't last long after Kabuto died. It seems that their coming back to life was tied to his life force, so when he died, they only had a short time left in the world. Kushina was sitting at the tent's main desk, which was full of maps and papers. Naruto completely fixed her arm, so she put her head on the backs of her hands and thought about the short time she had spent with her husband. Since the night of the Kyuubi sealing, she had been able to tell her husband everything that had happened. How Danzo took her away and sold her as a slave to Iwa. How Naruto finally saved her, even though he didn't mean to. How their son had lived in Konoha and what he had learned and how powerful he had become. And she told him that she and her husband had found their long-lost daughter. Minato was sad when he heard what happened to his son, but he was proud of the man his son was becoming and happy to hear that their daughter was still alive and well. But eventually, the jutsu started to run out, and Minato slowly started to fall apart into nothing. But before he did, he was able to give his wife one last kiss and tell her he loved her. Then he was gone, and Kushina lost him again. She tried hard not to cry at that last memory, because it reminded her that she had to lose her husband a second time. She wished that the Otokage would burn forever in the worst part of hell for being so cruel. Hinata was huddled in a corner of the tent, staring blankly at the ground. She had been talking with her mother for a while, telling her about her life. What happened to the Hyuga clan after she died, how she spent her time at the academy, who her teammates and friends were, and how she felt about Naruto. Then she talked about how Naruto was thought to have died and how she had become the cruel-hearted blue demon of Konoha. The missions she'd been on and the fights she'd been in. All of this led up to the moment when she found Naruto hiding behind the armor of the famous demon Dragon Rider. He was alive and well. She ended by saying how she became a Dragon Rider. Hitomi had just finished telling her how proud she was of her daughter when she began to get weaker. Hinata had used what little magic she knew to try to stop this and save her mother, but it didn't work. But it hadn't been enough. As Naruto watched his mom and Hinata, he let out a quiet sigh. Both were in a lot of pain because they had to fight someone they really cared about and then had to watch them leave, losing them again. He had tried to talk to them about what had happened, but neither of them seemed interested in doing so. When they got back to camp, they just kept quiet and went back to the tent. He sat back and thought quietly. Kyuubi and Onyxia, do either of you have any ideas about what I should do? As she thought about it, Onyxia, who was sitting outside the tent with Azurin, grumbled. For now, I think you should just leave them alone. Let them try to work it out on their own, but be there for them if they need you, she finally said. Kyuubi laughed inside of Naruto. Humans and your feelings. They should get over it. It was just 2 bodies made to look like people close to them, she said. Naruto gave a growl. He thought back to her, maybe if you had someone who really cared about you, you'd understand how they feel. Kyuubi just remained silent, so Naruto looked at his mom and Hinata. He decided to do what Onyxia said in a quiet way. He would wait to see if things got worse or if they needed him. As he got up to go do something, he sighed. As he gave them one last look before leaving, he cursed Kabuto to the bottom of hell in a quiet voice. Konoha, a week later. At the moment, the mood in Konoha was the best it had been in 4 years. Shortly after the Kiri and Konoha task force came back, Tsunade came back with the prisoners held in Iwa and a lot of reparation money to pay for the release of Iwa shinobi who couldn't be traded back to Iwa because there weren't enough Konoha shinobi held prisoner. Not only that, but the Iwa shinobi hadn't done anything hostile since the prisoner exchange. This was mostly because they had lost their last ally in the war. Iwa was on its own, surrounded by the combined forces of Konoha and Suna on its southern and eastern edges. Naruto sighed as he looked out the window of the Hokage's office at the happy people below, who thought the war would soon be over and end in their favor. As he turned around, he saw Tsunade walk in. The blonde Hokage gave a nod. I'm sorry I'm late, Naruto. I had to take care of a few things, she said as she took her seat. Naruto gave a headshake. It's fine, Ba-chan. I didn't mind waiting, he said as he sat down in front of the desk. Tsunade watched him to figure out how he felt. Your mother and Hinata still don't seem to be better, do they? Naruto sighed and leaned back in his chair a little. My mom has recovered a little bit. She has me and Tayuya. But Hinata. She hasn't told anyone else. I don't think she wants to hurt her father and sister by telling them what happened. And she seems determined not to talk to me about it, for whatever reason. I don't know what to do. Tsunade got out a bottle of sake and 2 cups, then poured some of the alcohol into each cup. She gave Naruto one and took the other one. I could tell her to go see Inoichi, but I wouldn't do that unless it was really important. For now, Naruto, I think you should just be there for her. He took a sip and thought about the cup. I guess you're right, but I don't know. I wish I could do more. It's unsettling to see her so upset. Tsunade grinned. Worried about her? You wouldn't happen to be getting closer to her, would you? Naruto gave a growl. Can it Ba-chan, he said as he poured himself another cup. Hinata is one of my students, and that's the only reason I worry about her. Tsunade just laughed and took another sip of her drink. Sure, Naruto. Sure, she said with a giggle, then calmed down and smiled softly. She said, I missed just talking to you. It was kind of lonely with only Jiraiya there. Naruto gave a soft smile. He sighed and said, well, we'll try to fix this, won't we? But for now, I do need to go check on Hinata and my mom, he said as he finished his sake and stood up. Tsunade nodded. Okay, Naruto. Perhaps you could stop by tomorrow and we could talk. It's a date, he smiled as he walked away. Outside, he sighed as he walked back to the Namikaze estate. As he walked, he looked around a bit. Truth be told, when Tsunade said that he cared about Hinata, it reminded him of a conversation he had with Aragon while he was training and with Kyuubi in Onyxia a few months later. Naruto couldn't really be with anyone else but Hinata, which was a sad fact. Because of his connection to Onyxia, he would outlive any woman he married by many generations. He might even live longer than their great-great-grandchildren. It would be too hard for him to watch any woman he married age while he stayed young. To see them die and know that he probably wouldn't join for a long time, if ever. He hadn't tried to date Hinata yet because he wasn't sure if she wanted a relationship and, if she did, if it would be with him. They were once again friends, but did she feel anything more? He didn't think so, since she had forgotten about him for years. When he saw some old friends at a small outdoor cafe copyright, he stopped. The cafe copyright was advertising some strange holiday with pink and red hearts. Valentine's Day is what it is called. He went down an alley, but he kept looking at his friends. Sakura and Ino were sitting next to Lee and Choji, and it looked like they were talking about each other. Neji and Tenten were probably talking about weapons while Choji and Lee were having a friendly eating competition. But the 2 other couples there were a surprise. One of them was Kiba, who was drinking a milkshake with a Kunoichi doctor he had seen a few times at the hospital. He tried to keep her name in mind. That was it, Mina. Shino and Tayuya, who was his own niece, made up the other pair. Tayuya seemed to be talking about something and gesturing in a way that was typical of an Uzumaki. Shino didn't say anything. He just listened quietly, but he seemed interested the whole time. He let out a soft sigh as he turned away and let them have fun. Since there was a war going on around them, they did deserve it. He quietly shook his head as he jumped up onto the roofs and ran home. He had to worry about other things. One of them is the group of 5S rank criminals who work for the Akatsuki. A megacure. Itachi walked slowly into his room in the main base of the Akatsuki and shut the door behind him. He and Kisame had just gotten a message from Pain telling them to stop looking for and catching the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. After fixing the broken ceiling statue, it looked like Pain would take care of Naruto. And he would bring Konan along. Itachi sighed as he walked to the small writing desk in his room and sat down to send Konoha a warning. When he saw a picture on the desk next to him, he stopped. One of him and Konan just relaxing and reading together on a couch. Kisame took the picture to use it as a threat. Itachi beat him up and left him unconscious on the ground. He was going to destroy the camera, but Konan stopped him and asked that the picture be developed. They'd both gotten a copy of it. In the 6 months since their first talk, he and Konan had grown close. Itachi wouldn't say that they were dating, but he would say that they were good friends. Now, she was about to go with him on a direct attack on Konoha to force them to either give up the Kyuubi Jinchuriki or make it fight them. Conan probably wouldn't fight, but she would be there to protect Pain's real body while his paths did all the fighting. Itachi looked at the painting. He knew Naruto was very strong from what Zetsu had said about him. This was made worse by Jiraiya's own reports, which told him what to expect from Naruto and helped him avoid being killed or giving away his secret role as Jiraiya's spy in Akatsuki. Naruto may have even been holding back a little bit. Naruto had said that he had powers that could kill any of them in a matter of seconds. But Naruto had turned them down. Itachi couldn't figure out what was going on. If Naruto ended up fighting the real Pain, Conan could be killed or seriously hurt. And if she doesn't, Konoha could catch her and question her. The thought of this made Itachi sick to his stomach and hurt his heart. Itachi looked back at the letter in front of him. He looked at it quietly for a while before coming to a decision. After he finished, he stood up and gathered everything in the room that was personal. He put them away and then went to get the note he had written for Jiraiya. He left the room without even looking back. While this was going on, Conan was in her own room thinking about what was going on. She let out a quiet sigh and wished she didn't have to go at all. But if Pain told her to do something, she wouldn't do it. Not because I love him, but because I'm a little afraid of him. She knew that he could kill her at any time if he wanted to. And to be honest, she didn't want to die anytime soon. She wanted to live so she could find out more about what was going on with Itachi. She found that she not only liked being with him a lot but also missed it sometimes. She wished quietly that Pain would take Kisame with him tomorrow when he went to get Kyuubi, so she could stay here with him. But Kisame was sent to check out Kumo and see if there was a way to get rid of the Nibi or Hachibi. Pain only trusted her to keep his real body, the body of the man who used to be called Nagato, safe. As she lay down on her bed, she sighed. From AIM, they would need at least a week to get to Konoha. She closed her eyes because she didn't want to face the morning, but she knew it would be silly to put it off. Her last thought before she fell asleep was a silent prayer that she would see Itachi again. That night in Konoha. While lying in bed, Naruto looked out the window at the full moon. Now that he wasn't worried about his mother and Hinata or the problems in his personal life, he was thinking about the next step of the war. Since the prisoners were moved, Iwa had not done anything to hurt anyone. They were probably shocked when they lost their last ally, because now the combined forces of Konoha, Suna, and Kiri could attack from all sides. Several of the smaller villages were now working together to strengthen their own forces and defenses so Iwa couldn't get back into them. Iwa's forces had now gone all the way back to their own territory. Akatsuki was the only other enemy out there. The group had stopped talking, but Naruto knew they wouldn't stop trying. A muffled voice stopped him in the middle of his thoughts. Naruto sat up and tried to hear the voice as soon as he became aware. When he couldn't tell who it was or what they were saying, he whispered, Atra Aka Horna, under his breath. 1. With his magically improved hearing, he could tell right away that the muffled voice was that of a woman in trouble. Naruto grabbed a knife quickly, got out of bed quietly, and crept into the hall. The voice came from the guest bedroom, so it was clear that Hinata was in trouble. He opened the door as quickly as he could without making a sound and peered inside. Hinata was crying and tossing and turning in her bed as she whispered, Mama, over and over again. Her face was scrunched up in pain and fear. Naruto walked over to her quietly, put the knife away, and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hinata's eyes opened wide and she took a deep breath almost as soon as his hand touched her shoulder. She gasped and looked around the room quickly before focusing on Naruto. She gasped, what happened? Is there something wrong? Naruto slowly shook his head. No, I heard you. It sounded like you were having a terrible dream, he said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. Hinata looked down and held the sheets tightly in her hands as she did so. She whispered, It was nothing, but she didn't look at him. He looked at her and felt a little angry and sad at the same time. Before getting up, he took a breath. As he got up to leave, he said, Okay, then. I'll let you go back to sleep. He had almost reached the door when she stopped him with her voice. Naruto, please don't leave. When Naruto turned around, he saw tears coming from her eyes. He went back to her and sat down next to her, then hugged her. In an instant, she was crying, holding his sleep shirt and burying her face in his chest while she sobbed. Naruto held her as she cried and let out all the pain and sadness she had been holding in since the fight with her mother. He stroked her back slowly and tried his best to make her feel better. After a half hour, she slowly calmed down, and when she looked up at him, she would hiccup occasionally. He gently wiped away her tears, which made her smile and blush just a little bit. She let out a shaky breath as she got herself together. Thank you, she said softly, and then she laughed when she saw his shirt. I'm sorry I got you all wet. He was happy. It's okay. I don't mind at all, he said softly as he finished wiping her tears away. She gave a soft nod and then looked down. She got a little red and shook. And Naruto, could you stay here tonight? I don't want to be alone. Naruto would have told her that she had Azurin, but the dragon couldn't be here in person. So, he smiled and softly nodded his head. Hinata slowly moved, making room for him to get under the covers. She moved to his side slowly and almost shyly, putting her arms around him and snuggling. As Naruto held her close, her face was almost glowing, and his wasn't much better. Hinata bit her lip, then bent over and kissed him on the cheek. She whispered, thank you, and some of the old Hinata came out. Good night. He got even redder and nodded. Good night to you too, he said, trying to figure out how he was going to sleep with her in this position. Even though she had just kissed him on the cheek. It seemed to be mostly a friendly move, but still. She hid from view by putting her head in his chest. She, too, was thinking about how she was going to sleep that night. Neither of them knew that there were 4 sets of eyes watching them. From the window, Onyxia and Azurin smiled softly as they watched their riders bond and help each other through a hard time. From the doorway, Tayuya and Kushina smiled and held cameras that were almost exactly the same. But their goals were different. Kushina wanted a picture of a cute moment, while Tayuya wanted something she could use against Kushina. The 4 watchers went back to their own beds to give the 2 riders some privacy. One by one, they fell asleep, and as they did, the house seemed to get a little brighter. Like a weight had been taken off. Naruto just stood there and looked at Hinata. Every so often, he could feel her shiver in his arms. He gently stroked her back to make her feel better. He could feel her tension slowly leave her, and when her breathing became slow and steady, he knew she was asleep. He looked at her quietly and saw that the moonlight gently lit up her face, which was now calm. He thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. Slowly, he bent down and put his lips on hers in a sweet way to show how much he cared. As he held her, he quietly said, "Good night, Hinata-chan." Slowly, he fell asleep and didn't notice the smile on her face as she slept.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.